Hi, everyone. My name is Adrian Blackwell. I'm a member of Architects Against Housing Alienation and a professor at the University of Waterloo. I just want to acknowledge that Waterloo is located on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabeg, and Haudenosaunee peoples. It's in the Haldeman Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations that includes 10 kilometers on each side of the Grand River. The Superstudio is centrally concerned with the rights of all people to affordable housing, environmental justice, and equity. Across all the Superstudio sites, there have been ongoing issues of disparity and oppression that were initiated through violent processes of European colonization that included the displacement of Indigenous peoples from the lands that sustained them across Turtle Island, North America. Within this Superstudio, we seek ways to recognize and respect the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples across Canada and their inherent right to be at home in the cities now occupying their land. In order to design a more accessible, ecologically sound, and economically sustainable home for all human and more than human life. So we're very happy to welcome Cheryl Atkinson as the third lecturer in the End Housing Alienation Now Across Canada Superstudio. Cheryl is an associate chair and professor in architecture at Toronto Metropolitan University and principal of Atkinson Architect. Her teaching, research, and design have focused on missing middle housing development and design strategies and their integral relationship to livable and sustainable housing in cities. Her work includes a focus on reclaiming and adaptive reuse of underutilized land and buildings and strategies to improve performance and cost through prefabrication and circularity. She's done incredible research on the post-occupancy analysis of health environments, including Bridgepoint Healthcare, an unprecedented post-occupancy study. She's done design and fabrication with students for the Prefab Zero House at the Edit DX exhibition in 2017. And for 18 years, she was a design lead at Teeple Architects, contributing to many buildings winning OAA and Governor General's awards. She's practiced independently since joining TMU. So thanks so much, Cheryl, and welcome.
Thanks, Adrian, and welcome to our audience here and across Canada. So we've got two studios happening here at TMU right now, working around housing. There's our second year studio, and all our students are here from that. And we've also got a graduate studio that is working in that housing area with Tura Cousins-Wilson and Julia Willett. So I'm going to start by doing a preamble around the topic and why it's so important. And then I'm going to present a couple of my projects. I'll try not to talk too long. I was trying to minimize the number of slides as much as possible. It's a big, wicked problem we're dealing with right now, not just in Toronto, but in Canada and in many other cities around the world, is access to housing and access to proper housing and access to affordable housing. Okay, so living close. So what capacity does architecture have to address these international and co-related crises of politics, climate, and housing? We often think that we can't do very much about these things, that we're mere architects. Housing shapes our cities, and our cities help shape our human interactions. How do we build to minimize natural and economic resources and make more socially connected and enjoyable cities? So we've seen currently that tall and sprawl really hasn't worked in Toronto. The condominium market, which was rampant for the last 15 years and is gradually winding up, has created a lot of inhospitable spaces, and urbanistically and environmentally. It's high carbon, it's high cost. So we're looking at other alternatives, which we have been for some time. all of the land in yellow here is 70% of the GTA zoned as residential single family. So we see that as, a lot of people have been talking about this for some time, we see that as a destination for locating additional housing. The Main Street initiatives from the City of Toronto is intended to address it with 6-story buildings along Main Street, replacing the many 2-story buildings that are there currently, which are a poor use of transit and space. But these have also proven not to be particularly prolific because it's hard to assemble land, they're expensive to build, and for a number of different reasons. So the city is reassessing the guidelines around these. So going back to some incremental infill that Adrian talked about in his talk at the beginning of the series last fall, and in our neighborhood, Sherburne Lanes, which was a fairly remarkable project when it was first introduced in the 1970s by Diamond and Myers, which was looking at, in lieu of building towers at the time, how can they put the same amount of density into a mid-rise infill project on existing land? So we visited that project at the beginning of the semester. And what's also interesting about the project is the amount of shared space. So gathering up all of those backyards and amalgamating them together and making a common shared area and muse. Unfortunately, it's all fenced off now, but that was the original idea. So walk-up apartments, 6 stories stacked, 2-story maisonettes, and the courtyard muse. The office went on to do other projects based on infill and courtyard, the courtyard premise as a foundation. So the Beverly Street apartment complex, and otherwise known as Hydro Block, because it was built on land, surplus land owned by Hydro, has remained a very well used and well loved building that fits into the into its situation in the middle of the city, not far from the AGO. So again, walk up maisonettes, no elevators, skip stop units with hallways only every second floor, a store at the base of the building, and lots of shared amenities like laundry rooms and outdoor space. So what are the things that an architect can do? We can build closer. And we can, we all admire European cities where everything is much tighter. We like the streets. We like the activity on the streets. We like the atmosphere of these kinds of urban situations. And but it's not always possible to do that because our urban infrastructure isn't set up to accommodate a wholesale transformation of our street infrastructure. So how might we intensify? We can revisit abandoned and locally outlawed typologies like courtyard apartments that used to be prolific in the early 20th century, in the 1920s, until local bylaws zoned them out. So they're another typology that we can advocate and start to reincorporate. We can build smaller units and more public space. In Canada, we have some of the biggest housing units in the world, right up there, second to the US and third to Australia, whereas many other places in the world have much, much smaller footprints. So we haven't taken advantage, or we've wasted the amount of space that we have and sprawled for a long time. We can share spaces. So building collective housing gathering those backyards into one big common space, like a courtyard for everybody to share and use, and build lower heights. This is a project in Germany where the blocks are a little bigger and you can accommodate things like that. This is a cross section of that same project called Big Yard. And the block width is big enough that they can, again, use a kind of typology of stacked units, walk-up apartments, and a shared common area. There's lots of examples in places like the UK of new infill infrastructure, again, always premised around the idea of a courtyard at its center. And we've got some examples here too, as a kind of hybrid typology, again, just around the corner from TMU, 60 Richmond Street. That was a project that was wrapping up in the office when I left. And it's an interesting typology in that it's not just a courtyard, but it's a vertical courtyard. So it's carving spaces vertically out of the main building. It's on a main street, but it's not terraced back. It's maybe not the most efficient building with all of that envelope, but it's got sustainability at its foundation in terms of bringing in lots of natural light, making window openings relatively small, designing to passive house standards in terms of envelope, and also introducing social sustainability by having uses at grade like there's a training kitchen for the residents who have all come from Regent Park when Regent Park was being developed. So thinking about how people could live together sustainably, not just in terms of saving energy, but also socially. So this is the this is a project from one of our students, Mia Brown, who is in third year now. This was her project. This is at the year-end show last year. So this is the project that our students will be moving on to next at the end of next week when they finish off developing and presenting their laneway houses that they've been working on for the first half of the term. So we've been working on a site near Allen Gardens with our students. They're taking typical laneway housing sites in the neighborhood, and they're intensifying them, building higher than what's allowed by the current bylaws. And we'll be doing a similar thing on another set of sites, all situated around Allen Gardens. So that's what's coming up next. So I'm going to segue now into some of the projects of my own and start with a project that Adrian mentioned that I worked on it's more than a couple of years ago now, but it was back in 2017. A group of students from engineering wanted to do a project. They wanted to enter the solar decathlon in China that year. And they'd come to us because they weren't getting anywhere with the design. And they were proposing a steel tower with lots of added elements that were mostly technological, but it was completely unsustainable in many other ways. So I got together with a couple of students over the summer, got a little grant, and we worked on this project. So we turned it around into something that was more about a horizontal building. Again, kind of like the mid-rise guidelines, using existing infrastructure like high speed arterials or low quality arterials architecturally that abound in Toronto on east-west orientations, and using the building to accommodate larger units, 3-bedroom units, families, within family neighborhoods close to schools and daycare centers and other kinds of local amenities, libraries, etc. The other layer we added to the thing was to think about construction efficiency and investigate prefabrication. And that was a point at which we involved another partner, Chris Magwood from the Endeavor Center, who runs a program in Peterborough where they train students to build passive house projects, and every year they do a prototype. So between them and our team, we also discovered that there was a competition happening in Toronto, or an exhibition happening in Toronto. So we abandoned the solar decathlon in China, which was way too expensive, and pursued this project and building a prototype unit within this project to exhibit at DX in the fall. So that's a cross section of the project. Similarly, stacked mezzanette units with skip-stop walkways every second floor, which are communal spaces for the residents to meet and see each other, with windows that open up so that all the units have cross ventilation through the corridor, and a sort of buffer space to enter. The the theory was that we would use the facades, because we're a low altitude or low latitude, not low altitude, low latitude country, that we get lots of horizontal daylight in the winter when you need it to generate energy, and to incorporate a solar building integrated PV system into the facade. Each of the units has a large courtyard, so that you can put a table out there and eat, and 3 bedrooms. There's a cross section with lots of room for insulation. Panelized construction. We were beginning to develop the panelized construction strategy here. The final prototype, which was designed as a freestanding house. So in order to pay for the project, we found a buyer for it, and proposed after the exhibition to re-erect it on her land. So here's an image of the photovoltaics and their peel and stick system that goes between each panel of the standing seam roofs. There's the a cross section. It has a open to below mezzanine on the second floor. She's since added a bedroom, the owner. There's an image of the kitchen. Everything was panelized so to be assembled on site at the exhibition. And these are maple ply veneer panels in an IKEA kitchen. This is the construction process. So it all happened off site in a field in Peterborough over a summer with Chris Magwood's students. And there's their drawing of the panelized system that we would use. There they are working on big, thick panels. There was straw bale in the lower walls of the building and blown in cellulose in the top. So in this image, you can see them packing straw bale into the box sections. And we experimented with mycelium and cork and a variety of different materials, tilting up some panels, craning them in place. Assembling the house took 14 hours and longer to fit out once it landed on its final site. But that was the process during construction for the exhibition. Everything that all the energy they used while they were building it was supplied by these 4 solar panels in the field that was donated by some nuns in Peterborough. And the image on the right is the amount of garbage that was dealt with at the end of the project. So everything was recycled. That was the Edit DX exhibition, which was a huge deal in the Lever building before it was torn down. And there it is on site at the exhibition under reassembly. So the panels were all shipped with the membranes and the strapping ready for the panels, and they were reassembled on site, both outside and interior panels. Flooring was already installed. And there's an image from that's a Tom Arbin image who took it while it was on site at Edit DX. So it turned out quite beautifully. That's a level viewing down from the level below or the level above. So it was built 3 times in total between these different locations. And that's where it sits now in Peterborough, or sorry, not in Peterborough. It started in Peterborough. Now it's in Collingwood, where my friend Kim Harris now lives. So she bought the thing and it was re-erected on her site. And she says that it costs her $200 a year in energy bills, which is mostly the cost of the distribution of the power to her site. So the solar panels are on just on the hipped portion of the roof, and she found a site that was oriented north-south, so it works. The next project I'm going to show you is one that was just finished last spring, and it's on Gerrard Street East. I worked with a client who came to me after seeing the house I just showed you, and he's somebody that was responsible for working. He was a client for Martin Lefebvre, who developed this off-grid house on a laneway in the 90s for his family. And so Rolf Palahamo was very interested in early eco development, and he lived here for, I think, 20 years off-grid. He developed the water recycling program, and it was all paneled by solar energy. So this is the site location for the Gerrard Street project. It's well located, close to a main street, to transit, to a park, and is full of a range of building types, from large 19th century homes on similar sized sites as ours to apartment buildings and narrow. So there's this building here is the house that we tore down that was on site. This is a 3-story apartment building nearby, and this is the neighboring houses next to our site. So this was a lengthy approval process. We tried a number of different things. The first idea they had was they wanted to do townhouse type development, but stacked townhouses. And they wanted to divide the 50-foot lot into 3 lots. And that wasn't allowable because it was considered to be too narrow for the neighborhood, even though there were other buildings of that size already there. Eventually, we subdivided the site into 2 lots and came up with a plan to make 2 fourplexes and 2 laneway houses at the back of the site. So there's a site plan. So you can, there's the 2 attached fourplexes, the 2 adjacent houses, the 2 laneway houses, a shared courtyard between them. And the laneway is part of a turning laneway that's close to a fire hydrant that makes those possible. There's a typical floor plan. Each floor is slightly different, and that's due to the fact that the buildings all have a front door. The fourplexes, each unit has its own front door, which allowed us to avoid a second set of stairs in the project. And so each apartment's about 1,000 square feet, including its gross, including walls, and the laneway houses are each about 1,300 square feet, again, including fairly thick walls. So this was also all built to, it's not Passive House certified, but it's using Passive House details and energy specifications and wall thicknesses and materials. Sorry, they're all 3-bedroom units, except for 2, which are 2 bedrooms. So out of the 10, 8 are 3 bedrooms. There's a view of the cross section of the project, and you can see we had to build under a very significant tree here, which was going to make the project kind of unviable, but we, with an arborist and the collaboration with urban forestry, were allowed to build over the tree roots using helical piles between the tree roots. So it's a wooden slab, floating, insulated wooden slab floating over the tree roots for the laneway house. So it's something that our second year students are familiar with, because I allowed them to do the same thing on their projects, which each have a tree on them in their current laneway projects. And there's one of the cross section through the tallest stair. There's sunken courtyards at each end of the lower level units. And we were, because of the difficulty we had trying to get approval on the project, there were lots of neighbors, as is typical in Toronto, who didn't want us to do the project at all. They were very against having greater intensity in the neighborhood, even though there was a range of building types already. So we decided we had to keep everything within the as of right boundaries of the bylaw after we got our variance to subdivide the site. So everything's under 10 meters height, which meant pushing the lowest level units half a level below. This is a collage of a bunch of articles that came out about the project while it was under construction. It became very topical because as we were finishing up and people were seeing it on site, the building officials came around and said, well, you can't do this. But we're almost finished. And other people were applying to do a similar thing on their properties. And they decided that this was outside of the intentions of the bylaw, because it was now suddenly an apartment building if it was 2 attached fourplexes. So it was an 8-plex, therefore an apartment building, therefore they wouldn't let anybody else do this anymore. So there was a lot of attention paid and to and fro with various people. And when Jason Thorne came in as the new urban planner, he changed the bylaw to make this acceptable in June, like just as we had to hold off actually renting them out while this discussion was going on. So this is the project and how it fits on the site. You can see it's pretty innocuous. The sloped roofs are exactly as required by the city bylaws. Nothing, we built to the millimeter of what was actually possible within the bylaws. So the thing that looks like a face at the front is the 750 millimeter overhang you're allowed beyond the setback at the front. And you can see there's a pretty deep setback typically on these sites in Toronto. And we could have had a bigger courtyard if we didn't have to adhere to those setbacks, but we didn't want to risk asking for a variance and have the whole project killed. So this is an image of the back of the fourplexes, not long after construction finished. So we have balconies for each unit that are fairly generous. I made the floors of them with an industrial grading so that there was some light that was able to pass through. We've bought IKEA wooden mats to cover those so that where people are sitting, they're not dropping dust into the lower level below. And this is a view of the courtyard from the side using my iPhone camera. So not exaggerated. So it's relatively tight, but it feels comfortable. It feels quite comfortable. It would have been nice to have had more space, and we would have tried to do that, but we wouldn't have had a project if we did. This is an image of the laneway houses facing the courtyard. So they're not mirrored, they're side to side. Again, there's another large tree on the site next to one of these houses that we had to keep. The dormer sizes are the maximum we could make them. And the nice thing about the project, we had a difficult time trying to figure out how to get in a second means of egress on such a small project, and then realized if we had a front door for each unit, we didn't have to have a second stair. So that meant that balconies at the back didn't get a stair added to them and cluttered up the courtyard even more. So you can see here there's 3 doors, one to the side and 2 facing, and then the unit below, there's a stair down from the front of the building that takes you into the lowest unit. And I designed this little bespoke letterbox because Canada Post was telling us that we had to have a gigantic industrial scale, suburban looking post box installed in the middle of the front yard because that was what was required by law. And in addition to a big transformer. So we managed to avoid both those things, partly by Rolf bribed the mailman with a cake, and he let us get away with the mailbox. And I think we fought hydro for a while to get an overhead connection to the street. So this is an entry to this is the uppermost unit. So looking down the stair and bringing that yellow color through. They're reasonably generous units in terms of scale. Again, 3 bedrooms in most cases, except for the upper 2, which are 2 bedrooms, or the uppermost one, which is 2 bedrooms, but it has an open office space next to that main floor. There's a view from one of the balconies looking to the southwest over a park nearby, and a big generous peninsula island, and windows from 2 orientations in the top floor, well, in all apartments. So we have 3 orientations for daylight and view in all 3 apartments, or all 10 apartments. And now I'm going to show some images of the laneway house. So this is the laneway house from the back. So that's Rolf's little electric car during construction. He was also the construction manager on site, and very interested in that. This is a real estate photographer's view of the laneway house before it was furnished, from the dining area towards the kitchen. So it is exaggerated in scale, but it is still a very generous space. It's got the biggest kitchen of all the units. So a full-size 3-bedroom house, 1,300 square feet. That's one of 2 bathrooms, 2 full bathrooms on the 2nd floor, using the depth of the 16-inch insulated ceiling to accommodate a mirror and a view to the sky. And I'm just going to harken back to this really excellent publication that just came out last fall that's talking a lot about these issues, and you can download it, and I recommend to all the students to do that. And it talks about the ramifications of all of the things that stop us from making modest incremental infill in some of these neighborhoods in Toronto. And they did a test building to see how on a typical block in the annex at which is shown on the right at Dovercourt and Dewson, and they are showing a 6-story building and a 4-story lane house, or smaller building. I don't know if you can call it a lane house at that, with a courtyard in between at 10 to 14 meters in width. And they've eliminated the front yard setback altogether. So pulled the building right up to within a couple meters of the site boundary on the street. So, and that's a cross section of it here. So you can see what that looks like, and it's possible. It's not impossible. And it's very similar to many buildings in Europe that work with those kinds of dimensions that we assume they're not going to be livable. We assume they're not going to be comfortable. But when we're in Europe, we think they're just fine. So, so I guess to wrap up, what is possible in Toronto? So what is possible right now? So on this project, we achieved 130 units per hectare versus 25, which is the average density of units per hectare citywide in Toronto. We achieved 430 people per hectare versus 65, which is the average citywide. So that's taking into account high rise and all of that low rise. There's 6 3-bedroom units, 2 2-bedroom units. The hard costs for construction were about $280 per square foot. And excuse me using square foot, but everybody operates that way in construction. So that's what, for residential construction, not other construction, but small residential construction. It's a walkable neighborhood. There's no huge transformer in the front lawn or a Canada Post mail station. And that's the end of my talk. And I haven't left a ton of time for questions, but maybe Adrian can tell me. Well, I think we've got till 3:15, maybe. Yeah. Okay. So we've got a microphone, and if anybody would like to ask some questions, I can answer them. Or if there's questions from the other audience, Adrian.
Yeah, let me see. I mean, we have an audience here, live audience.
Right.
Yet, but feel free to put your hands up. And I don't see anyone online yet.
I mean, you students are working on very similar projects going forward. And currently, in terms of the laneway houses, you're working with a bit greater complexity and density in terms of our 3-story laneway houses and our duplex laneway houses.
Any questions for Cheryl?
There's one.
Great.
Wait, just wait till you get the microphone, because it won't record it unless you do. Thanks.
I just have a question about what kind of challenges have come up so far when you're trying to bring this kind of activism and this kind of housing crisis into an academic studio setting?
What kind of challenges it's been bringing it into the studio? I don't think it's been very challenging, actually. I think this is the 3rd year I've run the studio. And the first year I was kind of worried about the complexity of the projects that we were giving students and at a 2nd year level, and worried about having even 2 projects of a certain amount of complexity accomplished in a normal studio. And students seem to really love it. I think it's firstly, I think because they all know it's the thing they know best. They all live in houses and pay attention to them, and houses and apartments, and are conscious of, really analyzing how they live every day. And I mean, we're still struggling with how to draw a stair a little bit, and yet students are trying very ambitious things with these units. So that probably is the most difficult thing. I would say. I think there's lots of ambition and intelligence with students. It's just sort of learning some of the basics. They don't know offhand how big a bathroom is or how to accommodate, head height and stairs and things like that. So there's challenges like that, but they're not too difficult. Oh, we can't hear you, Adrian.
Sorry about that. Can you stop sharing, Cheryl, just because so that we can see people's faces rather than,
Right.
thanks.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, Christine. Yeah.
Actually, maybe to not to steal your thunder, Cheryl, but I think that was a good question. I think in terms of like whether there's pushback on the part of the institution in terms of supporting this sort of studio, I think there's been a great excitement about engaging with housing. There's a significant housing crisis, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, and beyond across the country. And there's a keenness to engage with it head on, to think about these particular sites, to think about unique opportunities for housing, to think about different possibilities of solutions, and to have the students engage with, like, I think we're all very much on board and supportive of engaging with this particular topic.
Yeah, I certainly sense that in my studio. Students stay late, they're in studio, they're working hard. I mean, they always do, but I think I've had lots of good feedback on the studio from students in the past. It's challenging. It's not easy. We often, excuse me, I'm battling a cold. We often take for granted how, that straightforward looking plans are boring when sometimes they're just efficient, and sometimes we have to give up a little bit of inventiveness when we're designing compact spaces and still trying to give people key amenities like daylight and cross ventilation and energy sustainability. So I guess some advice would be not to be trying to do something that's overly complicated just for the sake of making it complicated. That some very we make do with some very poor housing already. Generally, I think most people are living in very tight spaces or under designed spaces. So most condos are, in fact, right? The shoebox condo, which has a lot of window at one end, but that's it. And they're nice mechanisms for trading and making money, or they used to be, but they are not very good for living in. And I think we're going to see a lot of white elephants for a while with those things. Yes.
Um, I I just had a question. You mentioned bring activity on the street and like how we can engage the street and the laneway in our case. Could you just talk about like what are some kind of like design aspects we can think about like trying to activate third spaces on the laneway and like creating a community in that area?
Right. You mean for our student projects? Well, we have incorporated a commercial space into the program. And so that's intended to animate the space. But even if you don't have that, I mean, in the project that I did, it wasn't long after people moved in, I started to see hockey nets and kids play equipment, because the laneway is not heavily used for cars, and so it's a play space now for children, and people put out chairs. You could see in that one image, both sets of houses now have chairs there facing the laneway. So I think the idea of incorporating places, live workspaces, places to display your pastries or your artwork or whatever it is you're making, which a number of students are investigating already, are ways to animate the lane. And it's not that it has to be a consistently commercial space. I think that's probably pretty unrealistic, but we used to have corner stores in many neighborhoods in Toronto, and then they were outlawed, and they're only starting to be allowed back in, and half of the city councilors won't allow them into their neighborhoods. So that encourages people to walk too, right? If you don't have to get in your car to go to a grocery store, and you can walk down to the corner and buy a carton of milk, that's you'll bump into some neighbors along the way. I mean, our courtyard in the back, it was interesting trying to landscape it, because my client kept wanting me to put bushes between the two laneway houses to separate them and give them a sense of ownership over their space. And it's barely landscaped right now. It's mostly wood chips, but we're going to be spending some time next summer. He has engaged a lot of people in the community to plant. So the front yard, he didn't actually buy any plants, because a woman who was living in the lower level unit was very interested in planting. So that's a collective thing that the tenants are doing. So that's something I'd like to do in the summer, is once people have lived there for a year, most of them just moved in the middle of the summer, beginning and middle of the summer, just see what they like or don't like about living in the building. And we drew a communal table in the courtyard, would they use that rather than, sitting on their own little porch as though it's a private piece of property. So those kinds of things I think will be interesting to look at going forward, to do a kind of post-occupancy evaluation of how it's used. But so far, so good. I think people are very friendly with one another. And Rolf, the client, lives in the unit I was showing you. So he's monitoring what's going on in the building, and he's making sure people understand where to put their garbage, and he makes sure it goes out in a reasonable way on the street. So we're just using like double sets of bins for the whole building, and we have collection that happens more frequently. But it's all those little things that I think are important when you're building a prototype, is to have people available to make sure that it kind of gets used properly, rather than often architects build things and then they walk away and it doesn't get used the way they thought it would get used, or they've forgotten things that they didn't account for. Yep. There's a question over there, Ivan.
Hi, I just had a very quick question. With the inclusion of public and community and commercial spaces, are there any new safety strategies to ensure the safety of inhabitants that students can perhaps apply that have already been applied in larger firms? We've learned about things like SEPTED from our current studio project, but I know that these things can often be controversial because it leads to hostility within architecture. But through our last studio crit, where we discussed things like, I believe, Center Village, the main downfall of that project was its lack of safety. So I was wondering if there are any strategies that we could perhaps look at that are not hostile.
Yeah, I mean, we experienced Sherburne Lanes, right? We walked around Sherburne Lanes, and that's a pretty hostile environment. I don't think it's because of the architecture, though. It's because of the way it's been occupied. It's been designated for an exclusive group of people that are experiencing lots of difficulty. And so there's a lot of drug use, obviously, and they've cordoned off the entire thing with fences. Every store in the neighborhood has got a big metal fence in front of it. So I think that's an issue of policy and occupancy and other things. I don't think it's an architectural issue. I think if it was a mixed group of people living in the building, and there weren't a lot of the other, there's a whole lot of social infrastructure in that neighborhood because there's a lot of people suffering from mental illness and drug addiction and various issues. And that's a societal thing that's gotten really bad in recent years with the fentanyl crisis and different things. So it's a bigger issue. This just happens to be a location where we put a lot of people of one suffering from the similar problems, and that creates a problem. I don't think it's the architecture. I think if it was a mixed-use building as it was originally intended to be, and it was open and people of a variety of incomes and backgrounds and jobs and et cetera lived there, then we wouldn't see that kind of sense of danger that I think you're concerned about. So I know a lot of people have talked about feeling like the laneway that we're building on was sketchy. They were saying it was sketchy, whereas it doesn't particularly feel that way to me. And there's other people with laneway houses there that obviously are enjoying living there, and they've got gates and they're open to the laneway. They're not hived off and trying to hide themselves. So I don't think you have to worry about it, actually. I think bringing more people into a community usually make it more safe. Having eyes on the street, that's an old Jane Jacobs thing, right? The more people you have in the area, they look out for one another and watch one another's children and all those kinds of things. So yeah, it's about reoccupying the downtown in a positive way.
Cheryl, I have a question.
Yep.
Can I ask, or is somebody else asking? Okay.
Sorry.
I really appreciate the different models of density that you've talked about. So you've got the 4-story model that you just showed us. There's the 6-story model from Impossible Toronto. And there's the 5-story model that you showed in your solar house.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're all very interesting. And our class right now is exploring the problem of massing and density on a diverse set of sites with different kinds of zoning, a lot of them very suburban. But I'm curious about what you think the next frontier is. Like, in certain ways, you know, the building that you fought to build is now as of right, pretty much, no? Yeah.
Yep.
So what's next? What's next? And how far do you go? You know, like, you've kind of criticized the tall model as non-sustainable. And I'm wondering what your kind of candid thoughts are about Impossible Toronto. Is that too dense? Or is that where we're headed? Or yeah, what do you think about this?
Well, Impossible Toronto, I think, would be great if you could raise the whole block and do that, because then there's a consistency, and then you've got a big communal courtyard. But if you in reality, it takes a really long time, and probably never happens where you would get the whole block to be configured that way. And not that the entire block has to be, even if it was 50%, I think that would be okay. But as long as there's one or two, then they kind of, there's always going to be a lot of pushback, I think, from the neighborhood, because they feel quite strongly about front yards and trees and all of that. I mean, the site that they picked at Dewson and Bathurst already has been widened, so there's very little front yard. So unfortunately, a lot of the streets in Toronto were widened pretty cruelly, and the streets used to be just 2-way streets, and we've got 4-lane streets in many places, and so if you don't have a front yard or a tree already, I think it's totally reasonable to build up close to the sidewalk, and it's urbane, and it would be great. So I'm all for it. I think there's so many great examples of it in Europe, but the reality of, I think, getting it passed in certain neighborhoods might be more difficult. And I mean, it's not, I guess what they're doing is not unlike what I was proposing on east-west arterials, but on a lot of the east-west arterials already don't have much housing on them. They're auto body shops and they're small businesses and that kind of thing. And they're like the narrow buffer zone between a neighborhood and an arterial. Bathurst, I guess you could call it an arterial to a degree. So, so maybe it's just doing one layer, right? You do the front of the street and the inboard houses that are in the annex could remain and be there. But I think what's great about Impossible Toronto, though, is they just really pulled the data together and illustrated it really clearly and made a proposition like, why can't we have density like this? And I think it will move the needle on some of the bylaws, as all of them are moving already quite quickly. It's been a long time. It took forever to get laneway houses approved, 20 years or more. And now suddenly fourplexes, then sixplexes, and other things will change. So I do find it something when I'm walking around other cities, I'm always looking at height and density and the feel of a street. And many 5- and 6-story buildings, which are pretty typical in London, England, they feel quite comfortable. You don't have to have the one-to-one proportion of a street. Yeah, you might not get as much daylight in, but I don't think that's as big a problem as we pretend it is here.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. I think we probably are at time. That was an incredibly inspiring lecture, and I just love the way you're able to think about quantity, economy, and really the quality and nuance of architecture at the same time. It's really, I think, a wonderful thing for our students. Thanks so much.
Okay, and thank you, Adrian. Okay, so see you next time.
See you next time.